Good morning, Derry.
They chained us shut.
An illegal colored speakeasy on the outskirts of town.
Watch out!
The blaze claims scores of lives,
Stop!
including beloved local butcher Stanley Kirsch.
Hello, Papa.
Who the hell are you?
Come to Papa.
Rest in peace, Stanley. No one could fillet a tenderloin quite like you.
There's a very nuanced character. There's an articulation to the character where she's the victim that later becomes a perpetrator because basically she helps it. The atrocities of the Black Spot wouldn't have been if Ingrid didn't call. And it's all, you can argue, like her intentions are to see her dad again.
I'm Marc Bernard.
And I'm Princess Weeks.
And this is the official Welcome to Derry podcast.
And today is a big one. We're diving into episode 107, The Black Spot, written by Jason Fuchs and Brad Caleb Kane, and directed by none other than Andy Muschietti.
This is the penultimate episode of the season, and you can feel it. The stakes are rising, the mythology is deepening, and Derry is starting to crack wide open. Kind of like Pennywise's mouth.
And because this episode is so pivotal, we've packed our show with an absolutely stacked lineup. We're talking with Andy and Barbara Muschietti, the executive producers and creative heartbeat behind the show.
Plus, production designer Paul Austerberry, who brought Derry to life, and composer Benjamin Wallfisch, who crafted the soundscape that's been haunting us all season.
It's a huge episode for a huge moment in the season, and we can't wait to get into it with you.
But first, your weekly spoiler warning. We are about to talk openly about everything that happens in episode 107.
So if you haven't watched yet, hit pause, go treat yourself to the episode, and then come right back. You do not want this one spoiled.
All right, let's get into it.
Wow, today's going to be a heavy episode. We're talking to everyone. But first, we're going to quickly go through some of our key top moments from episode 107, The Black Spot.
I mean, this was a big one. We're just downloading origin stories and paying off relationships and saying goodbye to some lovely, lovely children. Because we knew that, all the Losers Club was not going to survive, especially given how bloodthirsty this show began.
Exactly.
It was also going to end that way, too. So, first, let's talk about the origin of Pennywise. Pennywise issue 0.
Before the upgrades.
Yes,
exactly.
before the upgrades. And we get to see Bill Skarsgård as just a guy who seems like a sweet guy. I mean, he's a drunk, but
who
isn't a drunk?
Exactly.
It's 1908. Everybody was drunk all the time.
And when you do a prequel and you show the origin of certain characters, there's always a danger of demystifying it too much. But I felt with the Bob Gray character and showing him being the father of Ingrid, it honestly just made the character more interesting for me. Like that he really was like, I'm going to be the clown dad that stepped up.
Ladies and gentlemen, for your amusement, the Santini Brothers Carnival proudly presents the first father and daughter act in its history. Pennywise and Periwinkle Show.
It's kind of sweet and lovely and wonderful. Bob Gray's putting on his show, which is tender and sweet and super morbid. Clown dancing with his dead wife's outfit and gravestones popping up. And then you see the urchin boy, just cucking from the window above, watching these other children just have the blast of their lives as they terrorize poor Bob Gray.
Give me the ring!
And then, bad things happen.
The children seem drawn to you.
That's a strange thing for a young man to say.
Poor Bob Gray's like he's had a day. These knucklehead kids stole his wig. He's had a lovely, tender moment with his daughter. And he's getting a little nip-nip outside of the carnival. And a boy just literally steps out of the woods.
I can't find my parents. Will you help me find them?
Of course I will. Let's walk off into the distance together. Everything will be fine, won't it? We are not in a Stephen King story. I trust children out of the woods. Let's go.
It's just such a perfect flip of the usual predator-prey dynamic as well, because it's like usually, as an adult, you're supposed to help the small, fragile child. And it's like, no, that small, fragile child is about to steal your skin.
I'll swallow your soul.
Exactly. And maybe the afterlife will be easier for Bob Gray.
I mean, it definitely didn't seem like the life was all that awesome. Although we did have the love of a daughter who loved him back.
But being an orphan builds character. That's how you really level up in the game of being just a minor league character. Now she's going to be up here in the big leagues.
Yeah, and we have seen a little bit of how Ingrid turned out, and we will see even more later on in this episode. Because, spoilers, whatever. Ingrid is the one who called the police about Hank Grogan being at the black spot.
I knew they would come if they thought that he was here. And there would be blood and pain and fear.
I really want to see my pops. How do I see my pops? I got to get a bunch of people killed.
She's calling her father on her black boyfriend.
Yeah, and her white husband.
And her white husband, both. Diversity.
And I knew that you wouldn't be able to resist it. And you would come back. And you would tell me that I was good.
Don't mess with them white women, girl. You don't know what kind of clown trauma they're dealing with.
There's always a clown.
There's always a clown.
There's always a clown, metaphorically or literally.
I'll come back.
No.
I always do.
No, don't leave me, please. No. Don't abandon me.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. But yeah, the black spot, last episode 106 was just this beautiful, wonderful, elegy for what life could be like in Derry if everybody just put their trauma to the side and listened to some blues and some jazz and drank some Air Force soda pop. Young love can blossom, old tragedies can be put aside, and you can just kind of live a little bit in this little pocket of paradise. And then here comes the sort of lynch mob, literally, to fuck it up. A bunch of, Derry's upstanding white citizenry are wearing masks. Some masks are horror masks because, Easter eggs.
Right.
And some are just concealing the hatred that has been bubbling around the ley lines of Derry. And they burst their way in.
Good evening.
Guns drawn.
Here's the interaction, folks.
Demand Hank Grogan.
Give us what we want, and we go away.
Little did they realize, I suppose, that this was also a bunch of Air Force men who would probably be armed.
Now, would you look at that? We got guns, too.
And so suddenly it's a gunfight at the OK Corral.
Put them down, boys. Put them down. Put them down.
And so it seems like we've resolved the situation, right? Guns versus guns. The white guys are like, we don't want any piece of this, but we're not done with you, rascals. And they're not done with these rascals.
They chained us shut.
Is there another way out? Check the back.
They chain the doors shut and they firebomb the place.
It's one of those moments that is just so hearkening to why Stephen King's work is so effective, is how tragically and horrifically he blends the real life horror of this period with what's going on. And I think it's also perfect because when Charlotte was first speaking to the police, they were all like, this isn't the South. This is the North. We don't do that kind of stuff here. And yet they're doing the exact same thing, just with the veneer of Northern hospitality of but we're better than those Southerners. And I just felt like even in that moment where those Air Force men were in a place where they should have dignity, they're serving their country, they're just having a good time. But as we've talked about with Dick, the uniform is not the protection that they hoped it would be. And it's just a really sobering moment that we're reminded of all of that at once.
Absolutely. And, we have children in the middle of this as well.
Kids.
Yeah. It's harrowing and just chaos. I can't imagine what it was like to shoot that because it just feels like, just mania all over the place. There's gunfire, there's fire, there's just heads exploding. There's Dick trying his best not to see all of the dead people who are also around that place, but for the first time actually turning to the dead people for help. So we see him kind of round that corner, and you know who else is in this inferno? Pennywise. Because it worked. Ingrid's whole plan was like, I want to see my dad. What do I got to do? I got to bait the hook. And this was the bait for the hook. And Pennywise cannot resist.
A little bit of terror, a little bit of saute with his meal. Her hopefulness about seeing her dad. I'm like, it's sweet, but I'm like, girl, just send a telegram.
Literally, just go to the gravestone and just drop some flowers or something.
Yeah, pour one out for the homies, like a normal person.
So in the middle of this inferno, Dick helps Will and Ronnie and Hank get out, but Marge and Rich are still inside. And Rich is like, come, let's all climb into this cooler together. It'll be fine. There's plenty of room. And she gets into the cooler and he shuts the door on her. And poor Rich is just confessing his love.
Remember the day? That day all the guinea pigs got loose in the hallway because Robbie Mueller, he broke into the science lab. You came out of class with a yellow sweater and a gray skirt with a string tied to your finger. You remember that? You were so pretty.
Let me tell you the first time I saw your face. It's like a Motown song.
I know. The scream I scrumped. I was just like, no. This is going to be like my Titanic. Like, they could have both fit in the icebox. Sweet Rich. Ugh.
It's got to be the one you care the most about. The most innocent is the one who goes down.
It's just like, I got an icebox where my heart used to be. Literally.
There is this line that I do love it, where Pennywise is in the middle of the fire and he's eating somebody's head because, of course, that's what he's doing.
What's the matter? Do I have face on my face?
Do I have face on my face? Oh, that's strong.
Bill is so, like, it's so difficult to play such emotive characters with so much prosthetics. But Bill Skarsgård, everything he's in, just is like doing the most. He's like one of the best in the business at this thing. He's just so good as Pennywise.
Oh, 100%. I mean, those are the two big sort of pillars of this episode. The origin story and then the destruction of the black spot. But we do get a lot of, I'm not going to even call them codas, but we do get these punches as we careen towards the end of the episode. We get the idea that the augury is complete, according to Rose and the First Nations elders, that as far as they're concerned, the cycle is over. And it cost them 17 children's lives, plus everybody lost to the black spot. But, we'll see you shit asses in 27 years. They're very concerned about that. We see Ingrid get carted away after having had her soul eaten by Pennywise.
To Papa.
The thing where Pennywise unhinges his jaw and suddenly there's light in there, I think they're called dead lights.
Well, actually,
Hey!
they are called dead lights. They are considered to be the true form of Pennywise in it, and Pennywise uses these lights to break a person's mind.
Charlotte brings Hank to Rose to somehow get him out of Dodge. The army guys revealed that, oh yeah, by the way, we weren't looking to cage Pennywise and drop him on an enemy. We wanted to open the cage in America. And then I think one of my favorite images of the entire show is Pennywise, it was sleeping. Completely just maxing in his body stew up to his nose. Just guys,
Chilling.
I've been hibernating. It's been a couple of weeks. I've been busy just terrorizing Derry again. I love my work, but it's a lot of work.
Exactly. And when you love what you do, you have to take breaks to maintain a really good momentum.
Yeah. And he's his skincare ritual is legit,
No pores.
Yeah. Bathing in the blood of virgins seems to be a thing that has, since time immemorial, been very good for the skin. But yeah, when Shaw's folks decide to drop one of them pillars into a sort of foundry to see if they can melt it, and they do, the cycle is no longer complete. Pennywise opens his eyes and comes after poor Will.
I'm done being scared.
I can't hear you! What?
And you know what? When is anyone ever more pissed than when they've been woken up from a nap too early? I can't even blame Pennywise no more.
No, it's their own fault.
I'd be pissed too. Because also a 27-year nap sounds wonderful. And if you interrupted but a second of it, I'm like, okay. I'm taking all your kids this time. Because have I not been generous? Have I not been restrained?
Have I not been merciful?
Hello?
So yeah, all of that is setting the table for what promises to be a hell of a finale. And we'll see you to talk about it next week.
This episode was one of the most powerful and unsettling chapters of the season.
Yeah, you really sense the show shifting gears, and we start to feel the weight of where this story is heading.
And no one understands that shift better than the people shaping the entire world of Welcome to Derry.
Exactly. Andy and Barbara Muschietti have been the masterminds behind this series from day one, from day zero. And Andy's direction of this episode really brings everything into focus.
We sat down with them again, this time to talk about steering the season into its final act. We spoke to these two legends earlier this season about how Welcome to Derry took off, but now we want to know how they landed the plane so beautifully.
Of course, we are talking about the show's co-creators and executive producers, Andy and Barbara Muschietti, who have graciously come back to talk with us about the choices they made in the penultimate episode.
Welcome back to the show, Andy and Barbara. Andy, you also directed these last two episodes, so we're excited to get into all the movie magic you pulled off to bring it to life and make us cry.
Thank you, Princess. That was the purpose.
Amazing.
Well, let's jump right into episode 7. And we start this episode with a sort of deep flashback where we meet the OG Pennywise the Dancing Clown, a.k.a. Bob Gray. And I think we've all seen kind of sad clown iconography, but this sequence really captures that duality, the paradox, so well. There's a sadness behind this dancing Pennywise, who entertains a group of children with a playful gopher puppet and this animatronic stage that is just glorious and Rube Goldbergian. Can you talk about developing that particular set and scene?
Yeah, so we had a limited amount of time to tell the story of Bob Gray in this episode. So I wanted to make sure that in these two big sequences in 1908, we kind of understood not only the action in play, but also part of the backstory. So if you see, like, the sequence starts with the act. So you see this traveling carnival presenting Pennywise.
Feast your eyes on the amazing Pennywise, the dancing clown!
Pennywise comes out and he does his thing. And the act is basically comprised of two halves. The first act is a bit of a naive depiction of a clown that comes out of his house and says goodbye to his wife, which we only see the hand waving. And then he goes into a field of flowers and he picks the flowers, but they're taken by a gopher. So it's a very silly and, classic kind of story for kids. And then it turns into something darker, which is when he comes back from not picking the flowers because the gopher took them all. He comes back home and the hand of his wife, conveyed by a hanging thread of costume, is limp. So he goes inside and there's no wife, there's just an empty clown costume. And he starts dancing with the costume. So it's kind of a very poetic moment in which we tell the backstory of someone that lost his wife. So Bob Gray's wife died and he put it in his act. He tells the story of what happened to him. So we're basically telling the story without telling the story. And I think it's done in an elegant way. Also tells you a little bit about how Bob Gray, copes with the death of his wife and the sadness. He's playing it. He's including his daughter there. His daughter is the one making all the sounds, all the foley for his act. And also is the one that pushes the tombstone, which makes it even more tragic. And then they have this beautiful scene inside the wagon where we see the humanity of Bob Gray, which is like the first time we understand who Bob Gray is. In so many words, we understand that he's a performer that fell off grace in a way. We see him drinking on stage just before the curtains fall, and before they open up, he takes a swig from a flask. You wink it and you lose it. But the little guy that is also a stagehand, basically grabs the flask from him. It's just a little moment that tells you, okay, so he's a bit of an alcoholic, and also he's grieving the death of his wife. And also when Periwinkle asks him about, do you miss the circus?
Papa, do you ever miss the circus?
Sometimes. I miss the big crowds. Sure. The roars.
We understand that he used to be a bigger act. He was a performer with his wife who played Periwinkle. And after her death, he sort of spiraled down into depression and alcoholism. And he ended up in a smaller traveling carnival where he is now. But he has hope.
One day, the big tent will come a-calling again. You'll see.
And he's, at the bottom of it, he's a family man. Who knew? Bob Gray is a family man who's grieving and is doing the best that he can with his daughter and decides to fold her into the act, which she takes with a lot of pride. She becomes the new Periwinkle.
Periwinkle? That was Mom's stage name.
Well, you can change it if you like.
No. I love it.
Couple of details from his performance that you might have noticed, which is, as you know, at the end of his performance, there's a riot. The kids riot because it's like a Beatlemania, like a Pennywise mania, which is something that I wanted to basically put there just to validate that it in its current form, which is the kid that is watching from the barn, understands how much of a kid magnet that clown is, that he produces a Beatlemania on the spot. Kids go crazy because it's the dancing clown. So they want his wig, they just swarm him. Another little detail is that you notice that Bob Gray doesn't have the bucky teeth or the yellow eyes for that matter. Everything else is like a bit of a prototype of what the monster's incarnation is. The bucky teeth belong to the gopher and he happens to have yellow eyes. So it's, it's in the air.
We'd love to just know more about the development of Periwinkle because she's just an interesting character who is also seeking out her parents' love and approval. And we just want to know what made her so integral to the Pennywise story that you developed her with.
Well, what I found very tragic about Periwinkle and Ingrid, for that matters, is that she's the ultimate victim. She loses her dad to it, but also is tricked by it into believing her dad is still there, over the cycles.
Why? I can feel him right now, yes!
Stop!
He's reaching out for his baby girl!
Stop it!
There's a very nuanced character. There's an articulation to the character where she's the victim that later becomes a perpetrator because basically she helps it, She's the woman that calls Clint Bowers and tells him where Hank is hiding, which is the black spot. So there wouldn't be the tragedy and the massacre, the atrocities of the black spot wouldn't have been if Ingrid didn't call. And it's all, you can argue, like her intentions are to see her dad again because she believes that her dad is still there. And that's part of the big trickery of it.
Which does connect the dots, as you say, to the black spot, which is, the devastation, the emotional cratering, all of the events in the black spot. And it's such a juxtaposition to the previous episode's black spot, which was jubilant, which was full of joy and just music and life. How do you think that part of the story shows the difference between human evil and the monstrousness that we see from it?
I think what it's doing is by juxtaposition is basically saying, what happens in the black spot is pure human evil, is human evil. Our monster, Pennywise, basically capitalizes the suffering of that event, but it's an event that is inflamed and provoked by a human, which is Ingrid. And it's executed by this, bunch of assholes. But I think what Stephen King does with this is he juxtaposes the two sources of evil to tell you what we are capable of doing is as bad as what the monster is doing. Hence, we are monsters. Or better said, there are monsters among us.
I'd love to hear your takes on Rich's sacrifice, which made me so sad when I realized what was happening.
There's not enough room for...
Why was it worth ending Marge and Rich's young love this way? And did you grapple with that decision?
Of course. Well, it was back in the mini room 1,000 years ago. We knew that somebody had to go. And, I think all the names were put on the table. And I think we decided to go for the one that was going to hit us all the hardest, possibly because of, of that young love.
I think, there's great love stories that end up in tragedy. A movie that I love, though, is Dr. Zhivago, which is like a love story that spans over decades. Things like Out of Africa, or Romeo and Juliet, for that matter. They're all great love stories that are cemented in our souls so much because it has a tragic ending. I don't think we do it for the shock value of it. It's a bit of a reflection that you don't know what you got until it's gone. And also we want to make people cry. So
a little.
Success.
Fair amount.
How did you break the news to young Arian?
From the beginning. I
think he read it first.
Yeah.
We talked about it and, he understood what this was, that it was basically a sacrifice was an ultimate act of love. and basically tells how much Rich loves Marge. And he was willing to do this, and he wanted to do it, but it was very it was very sad for everyone.
Yeah, everybody
Even
was crying.
when they read the script, they turned to us and said, "What? Why?" But they all understood. Yeah,
It was hard to, and Ariane was 10 when he was shooting that, and Tilly was 14. So you're asking these very adult emotions from these very little kids, but they are so brutally smart and sensitive and intuitive that they give these incredible performances, and you have suddenly a full audience of adults crying because of this little kid's performance.
I love you, Rich. I love you too, Marge.
Barbara and Andy, thank you so much for your time. Please stay safe out there. Watch out for killer clowns, and we can't wait to talk to you again for the finale next week.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Princess.
Thank you, guys.
All right, now that we've heard from Andy and Barbara about shaping this episode,
We're talking to the guy who made Derry look and feel real. The walls, the streets, the sewers, and the 60s wallpaper you can practically smell.
he's worked on everything from The Color Purple to The Shape of Water, where he took home an Oscar for production design.
And this isn't his first trip to Derry. He was also the production designer for It Chapter 2.
Please welcome production designer Paul Austerberry.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So you've now helped shape the visual language of the It universe across multiple projects. And with Welcome to Derry, the world now spans more than a century. How did that visual language evolve for this story? And how do you maintain a cohesive visual thread that makes it feel like it's one town across all this time?
That's part of the magic of filmmaking. I mean, the town, even if we just pick one time period, 1962, for instance, the town was made up of about 4 different places. So already, just to even maintain the visual language from one era, it's a fair bit of work to make it cohesive. The 1908 stuff in this particular instance was really quite rural, so that was okay. That wasn't so bad. The 1935 stuff, a lot of it was interiors. We did Juniper Hill, which is the psychiatric hospital. That building we ended up using was near Niagara Falls. That was miles away from anything else. It was an old school for nuns, I believe, actually. So that we shot the exterior of that, and then we went inside in 1962. And then we backpedaled and went back to 1935. And of course, we shot that in black and white. So that helped quite a lot. We didn't change the colors or anything. We just left it as it was, and the dressing changed, but the architecture was still the same. Yeah, it's one of the things you do as a production designer. You have to really take multiple places and spaces and try to make them all work together. You go around a corner from one, and you have to imagine you're in the same place, but we could be like 3 hours away in another location altogether. It's just part of the magic.
What kind of research or references did you and your team pull from to kind of capture these eras? And were there any specific color palettes or photographs or architects that inspired these looks in your designs?
Essentially, we have kind of 2 worlds. In this particular one, we have the town of Derry, and we also have the DAFB, the military base. So we looked at colors from costumes from the military and the Air Force to help go into the blue grays and that kind of palette into the base, beiges and creams in the offices. And then contrasting that for the main town world and everything, the world of the 60s, a lot of the research is black and white from the photography we have. So we end up using looks from photographers, the shot in Kodachrome mostly. And so it's a real Kodachrome vibe in the main town. You see it in the costumes, you see it in the high school, you see it in the various houses. Essentially, the palette's a lot brighter in that world. There's a photographer in Vancouver that shot so many photographs of the time in the 50s and the early 60s, and that was a big resource. His last name is Herzog, and that informed a lot. There was a lot of reference of signage for there because this particular show has an incredible amount of graphic design that has to be done. The whole town, I think we did 35 stores. We had to do all the signs. Most of the signs are hand-painted. So there's an incredible amount of work that's required that needs a ton of reference.
Yeah, it's funny. I kept thinking of Gordon Parks's life photography from the 60s that he was doing, which was capturing, both that pastoral feeling of middle America, but also the collision with kind of race and class and how that all gel together.
Yeah, there's definitely something familiar and nostalgic about Derry. And thinking about the main street and those signs you had to create, it was fun to see the earlier versions of some familiar locations from the films. Can you give us some examples of spaces that were brought back for Welcome to Derry and what it was like to sort of reimagine them as they would have been in the early 60s?
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, the town is a main player in this series, so there was a lot of work to have to go back and create 1962 version of Derry. We've seen it in 1989 and 2017 in the films. So this time, we tried to bring back several things from there. We had the statue of Paul Bunyan, and originally when I did it, Chapter 2, I'd found an image of the statue being built, and it was a pretty interesting black and white image of the feet on the base and then a crane lowering down the upper portion from the waist up. And so one of the scenes we were able to recreate here through VFX is we had an old crane dropping our version of Paul Bunyan onto the statue. Of course, the Capitol Theater reoccurs in all the films. This time we had to create the Capitol Theater in an earlier version than we've seen, and also we never actually went into the theater before. Spoiler, it wasn't actually the interior of that particular theater. We went to another one about 2 hours away, and then we also recreated the projection booth. The young actress had to learn how to feed the film, and she did a great job.
Just a second, loading up the music, man.
It was lovely to get all that old stuff. The pharmacy was recreated again. We had a cast member that looked like a younger version of the pharmacist that we saw in the film. Secondhand Rose comes back again. First time we saw it with Stephen King was the shopkeeper. This time around, we actually had Rose, and we also had a shopkeeper that they cast that looked a little bit like a younger version of Stephen King, which is kind of fun.
Baseball cards, bowling ball, beaver, carafe, cups, cards.
Another striking thing about Welcome to Derry is the contrast between the sort of bright Norman Rockwellian above ground and then the sort of dark decaying spaces below. What are the challenges for designing for those two realities?
In the earlier films, they go down this well. They go through the Neibolt house, and they go down a well into the subterranean world. And of course, the color is desaturated. In this film, we brought the kids in a different way, and it was pretty tricky to find an interesting entrance for that. And in the end, we ended up finding a tunnel that was built underneath a railway track in the 1860s, I believe. And it was a really nice old stone entrance, which we used. And then we transitioned, outside there was nice and green, and the kids were in bright color outfits. And then as soon as you start going into the tunnel, the colors just desaturate. And then we end up in the world that we'd already created before and seen before in both films. And the language had to stay the same, but we had to now create nodes and different spaces for the various action pieces to take place. And one of the best ones was when we see Pennywise arrive.
Now they live down here with the clown!
Andy wanted him to appear above the children in the water on a dais and spin around kind of like a pole dancer on this pole. He's swinging around like a performer or a circus performer. And I had to prove that worked. It was me that swung around on that with Andy and the stunt guys to say that, you can't actually do this because it was right on the edge of the drop off into the water. And I said, yeah, you can spin right out into space and swing around and scare people from here. So that was kind of fun. But yes, it's fun to design those because it's quite different than the rest of the world.
What is a small detail in the world of Derry that you and your team built? Something that viewers might not sort of consciously notice that you love, that means something to you?
I mean, Andy always likes little Easter eggs, and my graphics team, they pepper in all kinds of funny little ones. There's a funny little sequence in the black spot where the airmen give two of the kids, Margie and Richie, Cokes, and they taste them, and they go, whoa, this is different Coke.
Tastes kind of funny.
That's the taste of freedom, son.
Unbeknownst to me, my graphics team took a picture of myself and created a rum bottle called Pablo Verde, and it's a really beautiful design. And it was sitting there on the counter, and it's just a tiny little thing that no one will ever know, but I have the bottle at home. It's just a fun little detail. I didn't have any idea that they were doing it, and I just showed up on set, and there it was, and it was like this hand-drawn version of me with a mustache and on a bottle.
You mentioned earlier that you built this very different color palette for the Derry Air Force Base, and I would love to hear more about what actually went into building the world of the DAFB.
Believe it or not, that was the hardest part of the story that visually we had to create. Because the show was shot in Canada, there's not nearly as many Air Force bases around us that would be in the States. So one Air Force base had a few period hangars, which we ended up using a fair bit. It also had barracks that we're able to use, but there weren't any real runways at that one. The entrance to the whole base we created somewhere else, which was an old It's called the Hearn Power Station, and it was built in the 50s. There's another, used to be an Air Force base right within the city limits of Toronto that had become the base of Bombardier, which is an aerospace engineering company that builds very large private jets. So we just were able to cobble together the base from 3 or 4 different locations. And of course, in the first episode, you see these big B-52s, but of course, we weren't able to get B-52s to stand in there. So Daryl and the VFX team, we came up with the idea that we'll do the full-size cutouts, just 2-dimensional cutouts of the fuselages, and we put 2 of them in this big space in blue, and we built 1 wing to cast a big shadow because some of the actors were underneath. And we're able to, recreate that very important scene where we first see these powerful airplanes, which is kind of important in this Cold War story. What was really fun for the Air Force Base was creating we call it the War Room. It's a bit like NASA, where all the guys are down below with all their workstations, and there's overhead projections above, and the general is up in the upper booth looking out over everything, and everyone's smoking, so there's nice haze for the projections. And of course, projectors are not bright enough. We had to sort of cheat that because these are just overhead projectors like you would have at high school, if you remember way back when, where you just put a little acetate on top of a projection. So we had to bury in the design, we buried like high-powered LED projectors in the floor of the wall behind these, and we projected them right through to sort of cheat it, and visual effects will fix the slight irregularities there. So that was a really, really tricky world we had to create, but it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
So in episode 107, we open with this gorgeous carnival performance with Pennywise the dancing clown on stage with this mechanical set that feels so handmade and beautiful. Can you take us inside that world and the references for this design?
Oh, yeah, that was one of the more fun sets on the project, actually. These kind of carnivals luckily have tons of reference photos in black and white. There's one particular image that had been colorized in the 1920s, I believe, and I took the colors from that because it was colorized in period. So, you imagine it might be correct. Someone had seen it in real life and did it. So that was the inspiration. And of course, we had an amazing team of scenic artists that had to hand paint them all. Actually, the most interesting part of that whole design was working out what to do with the Pennywise stage and his dance. In the backstory of this is Bob Gray, I should say. His wife had died, and Andy had come up with this idea to sort of tell that little story somehow in his stage play. And he wanted to have this romantic thing where he's in his house, this perfect little house, and he goes out into this perfect little garden, and he's collecting flowers for his wife, and his wife has passed at this point, so he has a little dance with the costume. That's kind of roughly what he said he wanted to do, and we had to figure out how best to portray that and how best to animate the changes in between it. So, he wanted to have them running through the flowers and then being taken away, and I was like, well, let's have these little animals. And so I pulled all these references of like folk art carved little creatures, and we ended up picking this gopher. There was a little gopher reference, and it was fun to figure out how to animate it. We had literally the special effects guys had a great time on this one. Normally they're doing explosions and fires and all this, but this one we had to use a lot of creativity and figure out how manually to have these characters pop up and down, the flowers pop up and down, the backdrops change, and it had to all be done like crudely, like the way they would. It was just pulleys and ropes and literally guys underneath the stage holding the little guy and having the eyes turn, the head turn and everything. So it was a lot of fun. It was a real team effort. And I think the guys killed it. It was like all departments came together and it was really beautifully done.
Speaking of the Gray family, in episode 106, Lily discovers Ingrid Kirsch's photo albums and realizes that Ingrid is actually Bob Gray's, a.k.a. Pennywise's daughter. And it's such this kind of intimate, chilling moment, and the room feels deceptively peaceful, right? There's like sunlight filtering through lace curtains, but then as she looks closer, every detail reveals something rotten underneath. What was the process of building the layers of that space?
Well, funnily enough, that space, prior to getting up to the attic, she's on the street. We found a beautiful really old house. Originally, we scouted the space, and there really is an attic up there, roughly the dimensions that you see in the final episode. But the stair was maybe 2 feet wide, and it had a little 90-degree turn to a 6-foot-tall door at the bottom with a very steep stair. Everyone kind of loved the sort of crampedness and everything of the space, but it was basically impossible to bring any furniture or anything upstairs, let alone cameras and a dolly and whatnot. So practicality came around, and we built it on stage. And I built it kind of in the same vein as the location. The set dressing we had so many stores, so many interiors and stuff to dress over the course of the show that a lot of stuff that we just collected, we'd always put little interesting things aside. And that all became the stuff in there. And then, of course, once we get into the insert and look at what she's actually looking at, that was a lot of work, again, for props and the art department to create all those little elements and those little details and to show the bit of the history. We collected all kinds of reference images and tickets from circuses and things that recreated things to be in this book. And there's so many little things that go on in that. We don't see it all either in the in the final episode.
But it's the effort that makes it all come together so perfectly. And I think one of the sets that really encapsulates that is the standpipe, where the Losers Club meets up and hangs out. It feels appropriately clubhousey and lived in. So I would just love to hear a little bit more about, the design process and the intentionality behind that setting, since we spend some really key and emotional moments there too.
Yes, the standpipe is a key spot for the Losers this time. From the Stephen King world, most of his books are based on Bangor, Maine. And in Bangor, there's a standpipe there, the Thomas Hill standpipe. That's what the postcard was based on in It 1. We didn't really do much with it in It 2. So this time we were able to develop it properly and inhabit it. And it's essentially, there's this steel water tower hidden within this nice wooden design on the outside with a big staircase, a dark staircase that goes all the way up, and it's about 50 feet up in the air. And then the little kids are up there. Their secret world is above everyone else. They can look down on everything and they can play. And it's kind of a nice counterpoint to when they go descend into the tunnels. There's lots of little details, again, comic books. Actually, you were asking earlier about little Easter eggs. One of our characters, when you may or may not notice it in episode 1, he's hiding his comic book inside the Torah at dinner. And when you open it up, it's actually the Flash. And of course, that's an Easter egg because, I also worked on it, but Andy directed the movie The Flash. And like I said, Andy likes putting these small little details in, and it was quite fun to see. But getting back to the standpipe, it was a tricky one to do as well because, of course, that's all on stage. We built it 18 feet off the ground. So it was tricky for the crew to shoot up there because we needed the staircase to get up for the opening scene. And also, once we tore it down, for a different episode, we needed to rebuild it again, but we just built it on the ground. And then we had a little bit of additional photography where we added another scene and we rebuilt it again. So it was one of these sets that got built multiple times. But it was a lot of fun. It's really nice for the kids to have that kind of big open hangout.
We've had a blast talking to you today, Paul. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
The music in Welcome to Derry builds dread, it grounds us in memory, and gently lets us know when it's safe to breathe again.
Composer Benjamin Wallfisch has been shaping the sound of Derry since the beginning, back with It Chapter 1.
He joined us from his studio, behind his piano, and we talked with him about how he builds tension, what makes this series' music so powerful. Now, we're talking to the guy who masterfully orchestrated the sound of Derry, every dissonant note raising goosebumps on our arms to each intentional silence, making us grip our security blankets for dear life.
And don't forget the swells of Young Love and the melancholic melody of Heartbreak.
With Golden Globe, BAFTA, Grammy, and Emmy nominations to boot, this composer's work lives in emotional subtext, deepening our connection to the characters and building a world we experience on a visceral level.
We may be podcast hosts, but our knowledge of sound is nothing compared to the master of music himself, Ben Wallfisch. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much, guys. Great to be here.
We're so excited. And this is such an interesting product because It Welcome to Derry was not your first visit into this quaint yet cursed town in Maine. Can you tell us about building a clearly very successful working relationship with the Muschiettis on It and It Chapter 2?
Absolutely. Well, it all started in 2017, where I was lucky enough to meet Andy and Barbara, and we just hit it off straight away and very quickly dived in to this incredible world. And it was without doubt one of the most wonderful and forming experiences for me creatively, musically, personally, that Andy and Barbara are among my absolute closest friends. And we've been now working together for, ever since then, last 8 years or so now. And we are always striving to push each other. I would say, obviously, he's striving to push me more than I'm pushing him. But there's a great back and forth. He's such an extraordinary collaborator. Not only every note he gives me, and I'm not exaggerating, every time he gives me a note, it always makes it better. And he has so many ideas, and he's so musical. And he's not one of those, some filmmakers, I've not actually worked with any that like this, but I hear of filmmakers sometimes who might play the guitar a bit and play the piano a bit, and then they try to dictate which chord you use, that kind of thing. That's just hearsay. I've never experienced it. But Andy's way is he communicates through emotion, and he communicates to me as if I'm an actor. But yet he'll have very specific, like there's always a forbidden chord in each project, or a forbidden. I always tease him where I when I discover what that chord, I try and sneak it in just under the radar, and he always notices. and then I transpose forbidden chords from other projects into new projects, and he still notices. So it's quite funny, but it's a collaboration which I treasure personally and most of all creatively, because he's made me a better composer over the years. And I mean, the It world is surprisingly emotional and tender, actually. When I first saw the movie, of course, there's tons of horror, tons of extremes, but underpinning everything is our love of the Losers Club and this coming of age story and the relationships that grow and flourish and blossom between these kids and how they come together to defeat something unimaginably terrifying and seemingly undefeatable.
I mean, I can't keep going without a more deep conversation on forbidden chords.
Yeah.
What is a forbidden chord? Like, was there some list on the wall that's just like, we cannot play a D sharp, we cannot do this?
Well, it's actually quite interesting because there's that famous story. I can't remember the studio of back in the 30s or something, of one of the studio heads who just, there was a moment in a score back then where he just didn't like the chord, and he said, what is that chord? And someone said, oh, it's a minor chord. And so he put it on the wall, no minor chords allowed. And literally all the scores they didn't sound that great. But no, it's not pedantic, it's more of a joke. But with Andy, no, I'm trying to remember. I think Andy's a big fan of this beautiful progression where you have a major chord like C major going to F minor. And I remember pitching to him, well, why don't we do the opposite? Why don't we have a minor chord going to the, because it's slightly more hopeful, and that was forbidden.
Hope is forbidden.
Yeah, although I did sneak it in at the end of the last episode. So anyway, it's a funny sort of humorous thing between us. But it's also really rooted in the fact the way he treats music is intrinsically emotional. He understands the sheer emotional potential of putting music against picture, which is obviously crazily enormous. And, as film composers, it's almost like, because we can so fundamentally change the emotional experience of what you're seeing, it's something we have to handle with great care. And for me, often the choice not to use music, to have silence, is as powerful as what you do when you do use music, like the rhythm of where the music comes and goes. And again, Andy's instincts when it comes to that, we're always kind of in sync on that front. I'll often pitch to him, why don't we try this here, try that, where he was previously thinking no music. And sometimes it makes it, sometimes it doesn't. But it's all in that spirit of how can we maximize music's potential, which might also be something very subtle and very small and simple, because that's what's needed.
Mm.
Are there any musical Easter eggs that come to mind?
I mean, there are so many. I guess one of the most obvious ones is Bob Gray. And, the Pennywise theme from the movies, this... right? And in the actual, in the movie, I think it's you first hear it over the paper boat scene with Georgie. There's, I can't remember the key. It's like that, and then the thing goes down a semitone. Anyway, what we did with Bob Gray is just turn it upside down, reverse it. I kept the same rhythm as the Pennywise theme, but the notes are mirrored backwards, so it turns into this. Which is, you can hear how they're mirror images of each other.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just one kind of not particularly subtle one. But actually, the more subtle one is Pennywise's theme in this show, because this is obviously before the events of the movies, and I thought, he hasn't yet fully formed the version of Pennywise we see 27 years later, and then 27 years after that in the second movie. So what if he's still figuring out his theme? So if you look at the tune, this, and then the second half is. So I was thinking, what would it be like if he had only figured out the second half, this? So what I did is I just added one note and changed the rhythm so that I added this first note. And then if you just take the same note, you get this, which is Pennywise theme in It, Welcome to Derry. So it's hidden because of two things. I added a note And I changed it because the Pennywise theme is in 3. There's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But the Pennywise theme in Welcome to Derry's in 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, like that. But it's the same notes. So it's like under the surface, and it's meant to function in a subliminal way. I can never say that word properly, but it's and that's intentional, because you kind of think, I recognize it, but I don't know why. And of course, Pennywise's tune is intentionally full of these creepy semitones. This, it's very crunchy, this kind of thing, But it's seemingly, if you play it like that, it sounds really ugly. But if you play it delicately, it's kind of innocent in a creepy, not quite right way, That's the Bob Gray idea. And you can see how sort of wistful it is, but it contains within it all of this dissonance and unresolved tension.
I could literally listen to you explain this all day long. It's so rich. And I think it just speaks to this understanding of all the juxtapositions happening in the narrative. And one of those is Derry itself. And we talked about it with production designer Paul Austerberry about how you have these bright, cheery, small town streets and this dark, twisted underbelly. So I'm just wondering how you managed to achieve that duality in the score as well, because I think it's just so masterful.
Thank you. I mean, it's something which we worked really hard on to kind of make a decision about what is our principal sound, because in the movies we chose large orchestra just because how cinematic the movies are, but also this TV show is incredibly cinematic, and it becomes even more so as it progresses. And we decided that the orchestra had a place, but not as the default. And in fact, certainly in the first 2 or 3 episodes, the default is solo instruments and string quartets, and just to make it feel personal. And I think we had these sort of signature sounds, which are entirely electronic, which we did in the movies too. But I think we really lent into that even more. There's this sound which Andy called the elephant, which you hear for the first time at the end of when the car is pulled up and you see the skeletons. It's something which recurs quite a lot, but we're also returning, the deadlight sound, which is an entirely electronic sound. But for me, one of my absolute favorite story arcs in Welcome to Derry is Dick. Chris Chalk, his performance is so masterful and so compelling. I got so much out of his performance musically, but also just what Dick's role is in our story and his own struggles, and the way that, it's in some ways, Pennywise is, who are you? He's like, you can do my tricks a little bit, and it's fascinating. There's this incredible idea that Pennywise can not only shapeshift into any physical form, he can also create hallucinations and get inside people's dreams, and in many ways so can Dick. And that was fascinating. So it took a long time to figure out what the sound would be. And in the end, I decided to do a recording session with an extraordinary vocalist, and there was the sense of, okay, how can we make this sound like it's an entity that's not human, but it relates to humans? So we processed this voice in such a way that it sounds totally strange. It's completely out of range of the singer, how we processed it, but also it has all kinds of strange reversals and overlaps. But of course, for Dick, once that box is open, that voice is no longer something he can control. I was thinking of it as something that tormented him before, in the same way as all of his visions of dead people and haunt him and their voices. Maybe part of that is the sung sound. So actually, we learned that what we've heard up to that point is his version, like his controlling of that music. Like it's a more serene but still sinister. And then after the box is open, it becomes what it was originally, which is this deafening, distorted, terrifying performance.
In episode 107, we're introduced to the origin of Pennywise, and it's a sad clown story set in 1908 at a carnival, and Pennywise a dancing clown, and that kind of ragtimey piano. Where did that score come from? Where did you kind of look back, and what were your inspirations for that? And how does it reflect the contrast in those choices of both the melancholic and the colorful at the same time?
Well, that was honestly one of the most enjoyable moments to score. And I did that in collaboration with my dear friend Alex Liu. And this is a really amazing opportunity to be, this idea of Pennywise the dancing clown. It's a legend. It's an idea that we all have our own interpretation of, but we actually get to see it and see what his show was. And it was actually a very sweet show. And his costume is kind of janky and it's not that great. And we think, oh, Pennywise was always this monstrous, but somehow perfectly organically formed clown, with this enormous head. No, it was all just a pretty bad costume and a very sweet, but not great show, on it. And, we see the backstory of Bob Gray, how he was basically kicked out of the circus and he misses the big top and, the big top will call her come in one day. All of this backstory, which I loved diving into. So the music was really just trying to, in a way, encapsulate the time, but also incorporate this beautiful Italian piece, which Andy discovered for the second movie. The Mrs. Kirsch music, which we hear on her record machine, is reprised, but in the form of something very, very sweet and small, and maybe you would have heard all the time, with an old record or a wax cylinder probably at that time. It was just the idea of what might he have at his disposal? And our original idea is that maybe he travels with these two drunk musicians, these sort of, he likes music, Pennywise, he sings in the second movie, but when he tries to be musical, he's really bad at it. Whenever you see actually Pennywise as the it entity inhabiting the Pennywise clown, Bob Gray's clown, he's not very good at it. So I thought maybe there's an origin of that. Maybe Bob Gray's band wasn't that great either, but they try really hard. So there's a few mistakes, but it's earnest and it's sweet because it's a very sweet show. It's a lovely show of loss and hope in a way that Bob Gray's Pennywise puts on for the kids. But then of course they completely take over and the dance happens and ends in chaos.
Everything always ends in chaos in Derry.
Yes.
What is your favorite score written by someone else?
I have so many, but there's one in particular that is always the one I name as my favorite, which is E.T. by John Williams. I think it's just the greatest film score ever written. And there are some incredible scores that have been written, which I am in awe of by some of my contemporaries writing today. But E.T. is what inspired me as a kid to really become a musician. It was through that score, that incredible piano piece you hear over the end credits. I remember hearing that and thinking, how do I play that? And what is it? And I was just utterly inspired. And every time I listen to that score, I go, should I give up? Because I can never be as good as this. It's just such a masterful, just the music alone is so masterful, but the way it captures the subtlety of the emotion, this young kid yearning for a friend, and the magic and the awe. And many people have described that music much better than I'm attempting to right now, but it's for me my absolute gold standard, my go-to whenever I want to be inspired. Pretty much anything by John Williams. And I was so lucky in my life to have been mentored by Hans Zimmer for 4 or 5 years, and he impacted my life more than anyone else on so many levels. And his influence, not only musically, but also in how he creates his scores, his production, his approach to story, his narrative, his emphasis on the filmmaking aspect of being a composer. I've learned so much from Hans, and such an extraordinarily generous man. And musically, his work as well is enormously influential on me, of course.
Thank you, Ben, so much for joining us today. It was amazing listening to you. I could have listened to you play and talk about it all day long. So just thank you so, so much.
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
And that's going to do it for this episode of Welcome to Derry. Huge thanks to Andy and Barbara Muschietti, Paul Austerberry, and Benjamin Wallfisch for joining us today.
This was our biggest episode yet, and it's only fitting because next week is the finale.
And for our finale, we're pulling out all the stops. We'll be joined by the Muschiettis, the Losers Club, and because Derry deserves a proper send-off, Pennywise himself, Bill Skarsgård, joined by Andy Muschietti.
So catch up, hydrate, brace yourself, because the last chapter takes some big swings.
We'll see you next week for the season finale. The It Welcome to Derry podcast is a production of HBO in collaboration with Spoke Media. The show is hosted by me, Mark Bernardin, and Princess Weeks.
Jenna Burnett is our senior producer, and Tess Ryan is our supervising producer.
Our associate producer is Addie Vaughn, with help from Monse Rodriguez and Trey Jones.
Sound design and mix by Sammy Syret.
For Spoke Media, our executive producer is Aaliyah Tavakoli.
Special thanks to Michael Gluckstadt, Allison Cohen-Sorokach, Kenya Reyes, and Aaron Kelly from the HBO Max podcast team.
Thanks for listening, and see you next week. Turn on your dead lights. Let it shine wherever you go.